All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I am your host, as always, Kane Sims, on a very festive Christmas jumper day in the UK, or Christmas sweater day, should I say there, Mike? It's Christmas sweater day for you, is it?
I should have worn a sweater. Had I known beforehand, I would have showed up with my ugly sweater.
Yeah. What is my sweater ugly like, is it? It is ugly Christmas sweater. It's the Grinch, this one. Me and my son have matching Christmas jumpers, and so very excited for Christmas jumper day. Excited for Christmas. Are you excited for Christmas, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I think we lost your audio for a split second there. I think we got it back now. Say something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, got you back. Got you back.
There we go. Yeah, yes, I'm looking forward to the holidays. It's time for a break.
It is. It's definitely time for a break. It's been a mad last quarter. I'm sure it has been for you as well.
This AI thing, it's kind of like keeping me busy.
It's taken off, isn't it? It's finally catching on. Yeah. And speaking of this AI thing, before we go any further, we have to let everybody know that this time next week, in fact, Wednesday next week, we'll be doing a webinar with Quiq. And so we encourage everybody to go and sign up for that, basically. We're going to be talking about Agentic AI, the realities of Agentic AI. We might touch on a little bit of that during this conversation, but next week when we chat with Bill, we're going to get into the realities and the practicalities of lessons learned of designing and building and deploying this stuff in the enterprise over the last 18 months. And so definitely encourage people to go there. If you go to vux.world/webinars, we'll put the link in the show notes and all that kind of stuff. Definitely encourage you to go there. We're going to be getting real deep into lessons learned in designing and deploying AI agents. So there you go. I'm sure that was something you're looking forward to, Mike.
Absolutely. And Bill, I think you'll enjoy the conversation with Bill. Bill's been involved in so many implementations and has some interesting observations to share with the team about what we've learned as we've done all these implementations.
Nice. Yeah, looking forward to that. So we will stick the links in there. Myself, Bill O'Neill, next Wednesday. Yes. Get yourself there. Be there or be oblong, as they say. Anyway, welcome, Mike. Have you been on a podcast before, Mike? I feel as though we've done this plenty of times before.
We've done a webinar before. This is the first time in the podcast. How come you've never invited me before?
Mike, I have an open door policy with you. You know that. You can come along anytime you like. But I knew we'd done something. But yes, obviously it was a webinar. But yeah, glad to have you here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
Nice one. So you mentioned there that, well, first of all, actually, let's tell everyone, for those that don't know, for those that weren't on the webinar that we did, for those that haven't yet signed up, although they're all probably signing up right now as we speak, but those that are not yet signed up for the webinar on Wednesday, tell us a little bit about Quiq and what you guys do.
Sure. So I'm CEO and founder of Quiq. That's Quiq. I guess that's probably pretty obvious given the background in my Zoom. We are a platform that builds agentic AI. And interestingly enough, we're not a Johnny-come-lately, if you will. We've been in the conversational AI space long before AI was trendy in this generation. And so we have a really powerful platform that is unique in that it is focused on building CX interactions with agentic AI that would be directly facing customers, would be agent assistants, and also is available via APIs to be called from other programs.
Nice. And how have you found the last kind of 18 months, the last 12 months maybe? It seems as though agentic AI wasn't necessarily something that you would hear every single day 18 months ago. It's something that you can't move without coming across the term these days. Like, what's your general sort of observations in terms of the last 12 months and the overall demand for agentic AI?
I mean, it's been well. First of all, I'll observe that it's like 2 years since GPT came out, and it
Mm.
still feels like GPT is like, I mean, it's not new, but it feels new-ish. And so, but it's been 2 years. Like, wow. And so to your point about like what's the last year been like? Well, actually, for us, we released our first customer-facing AI agent back in July of 23. And so we were maybe really early in the cycle to understand that generative AI could be used as a replacement for kind of generation one NLP. And of course, then generative AI also has generation, which completely changed the game. And so we've been building these things and deploying them, really first deployment July of 23. So what is that? Almost 18 months.
Mm. Nice. And how do you and how does Quiq define AI agents or agentic AI? Because there's for me there seems to be a little bit of a lack of clarity from the vendors out there, the ones who are, building the foundational models and, the open AIs and the Googles and the Amazons of the world. I've been doing a bit of research, which I'm going to publish over the next couple of days, likely, or maybe it's just after the webinar when I've spoken to Bill about this as well, is basically just putting something together that actually defines this for the people in the CX space and say this is what it is, this is what it isn't. So how do you describe agentic AI when you're talking with businesses?
It's interesting, like the how the terminology has changed. And it feels like in the last month or two, like the agentic term suddenly has shown up on the business scene. I mean, it was kind of circling around in the technical scene, but it really wasn't a term in the business scene. And before that, it was everybody was doing AI. Like, if you go back 6 months, like what do you do? Well, we're building AI. And now it's like we're building agentic AI. And I think the genesis of the agentic term it was really useful in the sense that there was essentially when you thought about how people were deploying AI agents, some agents were built to use static knowledge and be basically improved search. Other agents were built for, and agents, maybe the term was assistants back then, or even bots. Other bots were built to automate a business process. And that business process might be multi-flow and might be complicated. And there's clearly a difference in the a bot that automates something that a human agent might do versus a bot that automates a knowledge search lookup. And so this concept of agentic to try to like differentiate those two seems super useful. But frankly, I'm concerned that everybody in the space is now going to adopt agentic for all things, and it's going to be a watered down term, and nobody's going to understand like the difference again, and everybody's going to just be building agentic AI.
I think we're almost getting there anyway. I was reading something from Langchain probably about 2 days ago, and they describe agentic AI as having a scale. And on the one side, it is kind of end-to-end generative AI applications that use large language models to take input from a user, turn that input into a series of steps or tasks or processes, turn those series of steps, tasks, and processes into things that need to be done, and then going through that and looping through them and actually doing those things, integrating function calling. It could be content search, could be creation, could be it's all this kind of stuff. So that's like the far end of the agentic AI scale. But also, according to them, the other end of the scale, which is the beginning of the scale, is a definition that even Google has on its website, which is pretty much anything to do with applications that automate stuff for people, regardless of whether they're using agentic AI from end to end or if they're using rules. So there's this sort of like, it seems as though the scale is rule-based automation, which you referred to earlier on as AI or bots, chat bots or whatever, full-on end-to-end agentic generative AI infused applications that run LLMs from end to end. So really, it's kind of, and then Google says if you want to build agentic AI, then use Dialogflow CX, which is a rule-based system. So it's like it's very challenging to figure out what it is. So it seems as though my kind of the way I've arrived at it after looking at this for the last few weeks is it seems as though everyone is talking about it as having some degree of a scale. On the one side is rules, on the other side is generative creation and delivery of processes. But then even in the LangChain article, it kind of says towards the end, so that means that really agentic AI doesn't really mean anything because it means everything. So it's just challenging,
It
I
means
think, for,
everything.
yeah,
Yeah, like
it's,
that is so frustrating to me because it was like finally we have a term to describe like the next generation, and now everybody is applying it to everything that they've already done, and like the term is meaningless again. To your point, I mean, I think there's a huge difference in building a bot that is kind of like referencing static information with the vector search and building a business process that, as you said, kind of like as I think about agentic, and there's a lot of definitions out there. My definition is probably like agentic AI contains the reasoning, the logic, the resources, the connections to data, the connections to systems that allow it to, in the CX context, and we're very focused on CX, both of us. In the CX context, it would allow the AI to perform the same actions that you would think about a tier one customer service agent. And so if you can replace your tier one customer service agent with an AI agent, that feels agentic to me. If you can replace your knowledge search with an AI bot, that doesn't feel agentic to me. So that's my definition. Maybe I'm sticking to that and the just because of the world that I live in, but I'm hoping that we'll have some differentiation between those two ends of the spectrum that you described.
yeah, I agree with that. And because for me, it seems as though, like, if I've always kind of described it as, and this is AI in general, and this comes from Lawrence Moroney, who is the one of the AI evangelists at Google, who said something I think still stuck with me now, which is that machine learning, the difference between machine learning and traditional software programming is that traditional software programming is data plus rules equals answers. So if you have a form and you fill in the fields in that form and you press submit, there is data, and the rule is when the submit button is pressed, take that data and do something with it, and that's the answer. Whereas the way he describes machine learning, and I think the same is the case for, largely speaking, agentic AI in this case, which is that with machine learning, you provide data and answers, and it determines the rules. So if you wanted to do something like track a run on a smartwatch, how do you know the difference between a slow run and a fast walk? You can't write enough rules in the world to be able to figure that out. So instead, what you do is you put a tracker on somebody, and you have loads of people run and generate loads of running data. You have loads of people walk and generate a load of walking data. You say you label this data as running and that data as walking, and you have an algorithm that says, I understand the patterns in this data, so I'll be able to predict to you whether something is running or walking far better than you can program. It almost seems as though I think that definition could almost be applied to agentic AI, which is that if you know the rules of the thing you're trying to do, then do you need agentic AI? If it's complex, like some of the sort of like long tail tier one stuff, or even getting into tier two stuff, if it's fairly complex and you really don't know the rules, or it's just really, really complex and too complex to define, that seems to me to be fertile ground for agentic AI. I don't know if that sort of rings true for you, or whether there's a hole in that kind of logic.
That totally rings true. But I will say, there's probably some business people who are listening to this conversation and they're like, well, agentic AI sounds pretty scary because I don't know if I want that AI to actually be handling my long tail of requests. And so, I mean, the part of what we do as we work with our clients is to understand, like, what do we want the AI to, what's the domain that you want the AI to be playing in, your comfort zone, and what's outside the comfort zone, and make sure that the agent is only working inside of the comfort zone.
Yeah, and that's part of I think probably the most important part that businesses have been trying to struggle or trying to get through. And when you see a lot of the AI policies that have been coming out this year and stuff like that, like we've spoke to loads of companies who are saying, well, our policy is that we can't touch this stuff because it's too unpredictable and all that stuff. So like, what can you say to those people? I think that those policies should be working documents, and the things that are in there should be hypotheses that should be open to be tested. If a company like Quiq comes along and says, well, here's how we do it, and actually there's some assumptions in here that are not quite correct because the technology's moved on and all that kind of stuff. So what do you say to those kind of businesses who have those concerns around, oh, well, I don't want this thing making stuff up and all this lot? Like, how far have we come in its ability to be able to stay grounded and to be specialist in those domains and not opening the risks that maybe were there in 2022?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's one of the The acceptance of risk is probably one of the changes that I've seen in the industry this past year. Because, if I think back to where we were, last fall, everybody was like, AI is scary. I don't know if I want to touch it. And it's almost like, back in the early days of horse-drawn carriages and then automobiles, people were afraid that like automobiles weren't safe because you were going to be driving faster, it was going to be uncontrollable, et cetera. And gradually, everybody got comfortable with the fact that, like, if you're driving a car, you may have an accident. And everybody's accepted the risk of an accident while you're driving the car because, like, the utility of using the car is so much better than using the horse-drawn carriage. And so I think the same thing applies to where people's risk tolerance is evolving relative to AI. And still, there's organizations who are extremely conservative on this, and there's organizations that are leaning way in and have like no hesitation. And so there's a huge spectrum. But I think the base fear that existed a year ago has dissipated, and it's been replaced with an acceptance and an understanding of the fear. And what I would say to an organization is, there are some types of inquiries that are completely outside of the comfort zone, like legal policy or warranty, or like you don't want your AI to be paraphrasing your return policy. But on the other side of the coin, you trust human agents all day long to make decisions on behalf of your brand when you're interacting with your customers. And oftentimes those human agents aren't very well trained, and they might be, you might have 50 or 100% turnover in your contact center per year. And so the goal of the AI is, if we can be better, and in most cases considerably better than the untrained, inexperienced staff that are coming online in your contact center, isn't that an overall an improvement? So there's a little bit of a double standard, I think, that exists. And, again, people are going to accept this risk and be like, okay, it might not always be perfect, but it's better than what I'm already accepting in my contact center.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I remember you kind of touched on this when we spoke last, which is that is the right way to measure the success of these applications to compare them to the performance of agents, or is the right way to measure the success of these applications is to compare them to other software that is more deterministic?
Yeah.
Maybe I can see where you sit on this, but like, what's the right way of thinking about it?
I mean, at the end of the day, there are some topics that have to be absolutely deterministic. So in an implementation, we need to make sure that those things are completely deterministic. But there are other topics where it's okay to make an assessment and have some reasoning and some logic and let the AI do its purpose. And so, where do I stand? If we can provide higher quality than what you currently have with your agents, maybe it's not perfect in every situation. Wouldn't that be an overall improvement for the business?
Mm, yeah, that's a good point. I think the challenge is that it's interesting because we have this non-deterministic technology that on the one hand is actually great because it can be creative, it can surprise you, it can do really delightful things. The way that you can use this technology to do things that in a rule-based chatbot with predetermined responses you just couldn't do. So if somebody says something like, in fact, your the one we did the webinar about Loop, your client Loop car insurance, there's a brilliant example in there where if I ask it the question like, can I add my dog to my car policy? Then it will do a nice response to that. I say, I'm sorry, you can't add your pooch to your policy, but sorry about your canine friend, but you can add your wife or your sister. So it'll kind of answer the question, but it'll do it in a nice way that's contextual, and it's so the power of it is that you can get things like that from it. But I think the expectation of it is because it's technology, it should do the thing that we want it to do every single time. And I think from hearing what you're saying, it sounds as though businesses are coming round to the idea that maybe that's the wrong way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think the key thing is, as you said, it's not deterministic. If you want determinism, like you need to use the old school kind of like forms and rules. But then forms and rules are limited in how many cases that you can cover, and they're brittle and hard to maintain, et cetera. But if you want some reasoning, reasoning isn't deterministic.
Mm.
So, Kane, I got a funny question for you. How long do you think the agentic AI term is going to stick before there's a new term? It feels like it's been agentic AI has been around for a couple months now. Do you think there's another term that's coming up that will be the new buzzword?
Um, I think agentic AI will probably stick around at least for the next year. We've gone through basically, we started with chatbots, and then we went through assistants like Google Assistant and Alexa and Siri and stuff like that. And then we kind of went through this period of kind of like not really knowing what to call it. Some companies are calling them digital workers, some are calling them virtual assistants, some are calling them still chatbots. So it's kind of like the terminology was kind of, a bit uncertain. And now there's AI agents. And again, I find it difficult to define what an AI agent is. And therefore, it's quite challenging to say that that's one. And so it's kind of like this all-encompassing term is quite a challenge. But I think, but maybe because of that, that might be the reason why it sticks around, because maybe AI agent encapsulates all of the things that we've just mentioned. Chatbots and virtual assistants and voice assistants and all that. Maybe they're all part of an agent, an overarching agent. And then, in actual fact, the way that we've been talking about this kind of stuff in our when we work with clients, the way that we kind of describe it to them is that you kind of do have to think about it kind of like as you in a way that you are building one ultimate digital worker, right? An employee that's going to do everything that your people can do. But in order to do that, it needs to be able to have skills. So one skill might be the ability to change your address, and another one might be to close your credit card or whatever it might be. So, like, I've always described them as skills or capabilities. Now those capabilities are being called agents. And so the world that people describe now is that you've got one AI agent that sits across the top of it all that facilitates all the interactions with the other agents, which is exactly the same as we've been talking about for many, many years. But for me, it's like if AI agents get people excited and get people tuned into AI and understanding the value that it can bring and all that kind of stuff, then I don't really care what it's called, because the premise is still the same. You've got lots of different capabilities that over time increase and add more and more to them as you build out and scale, and those things are going to do more and more for your business. But I think the term AI agents is going to stick around for a while. I don't know what you think.
I, I think so too, and I think the term AI agents like works for me. Going back to the some of the ones you highlighted, chatbots. Well, that sounds like it's just something that's going to chatter and it's not very useful. Assistants. When you go into a store, like you would run into an associate, the helpful associate, but assistant feels like it's not it's going to assist you, maybe not like directly handle your issue.
Mm.
So, the nearest thing in the CX space has always been like, well, you have customer service representatives or agents in the contact center. So that having an AI agent that replaces that persona, that feels really comfortable. I do hope that the concept of AI agents doesn't get watered down so that we lose that, like, every AI is now called an AI agent. I hope that we'll have a differentiation that an AI agent includes kind of some of the reasoning and ability to handle multiple use cases that we've been describing.
Yeah, I agree. But also, it's like they're like, yeah, because the overarching way of describing an AI agent. Again, I like the way you've described it there, which is that the term agent aligns it to something that already exists, like a customer service agent, and that customer service agent should be able to do everything.
Yep.
And they've got some decision-making authority, and they can use some imagination and some creativity to solve problems, but they're focused on outcomes. Whereas an assistant, as you say, could be, someone that just checks you in at the front desk before bringing, taking you to where you need to be or whatever. Same thing as like Copilot. I think that's kind of like something that works alongside you and helps a bit, but it's not going to deliver the thing. So I kind of like the term agent. The challenge is that, for example, as you mentioned, for some things you might want some determinism, because some things might be actually fairly straightforward. If you need to, I don't know, let's say you want to freeze your bank card and you're doing that through conversation. The reality is that in order to freeze your bank card, you need to know what bank card it is. You need to authenticate that the person has the authority to freeze it. then you need to do something behind the scenes that actually freezes it. So there's certain steps that need to be followed. So maybe some deterministic logic there is not a bad thing, especially if it's a high risk area like finances. And the only AI that you're going to be using in that scenario is probably just NLU. Everything else is rules, but it's still delivering a good process. So technically speaking, it's kind of still an agent from the perspective of if it can do something, but it's not necessarily an agent as in it has agency, as in decision-making authority that it kind of creates and uses its initiative and reasoning as you've suggested. So it's almost like I'm torn because I used to hate the concept of agents being used for everything. I used to hate that idea. But then when you say chatbot sounds stupid. Voice assistant sounds as though it's only going to do half the job for you. Copilot is the same sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm kind of now that I'm talking more about it, I'm kind of unsure about whether I like it as a general term or whether I agree with you. I agree with you in terms of that it should be used where there's reasoning and there's decision making involved.
It's the best we've got at the current moment, so I like it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, yeah. So what have you seen over the last year then? 'Cause, when I first come across Quiq, it was because of, I think, loop car insurance. And I saw that example. I went on the website, I was testing the bot, and I was like, this is actually pretty good. Like, definitely the best example I'd seen of a RAG implementation that was working really well. What's changed since perhaps then? So maybe that was like, I don't know, maybe 12 months ago or so. In terms of retrieval augmented generation specifically, has there been any developments that you've observed or any things that's changed in the way that you do things over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things that I might highlight. Number one, I think the ability to manage hallucinations and safety and guardrails, fact checking, safeguards, all those things. Like the industry in general has gotten much better at those things. I mean, yeah, in that same time frame that we talked about our implementation. You were posting like, oh, look at this, like, these guys have a shipping bot that like hallucinates like crazy, and then there were folks that were in the finance space that it released inside of their app a GPT based agent that when you ask it how to replace your carburetor, it also answered that question as part of the finance app. Like it was, hallucinations were kind of rampant. And so I think the world has gotten much better at managing hallucinations. I think the understanding of how you don't just instruct the AI not to hallucinate, but actually applying other AI, other processing on the generated responses to be able to fact check. Like, I know the information, part of the benefit of RAG is I know the answer that should be included. And so I can fact check if I know the answer. If I've used an approach where I'm entirely relying on AI to answer the question directly, I don't actually know the answer, and so I have no way to fact check. And so, like, the beauty of the RAG paradigm is you know the answer, and so you can do fact checking. And the techniques for fact checking is one area that has changed a lot in the past year. So let me stop there and see if you have any comments about that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think that there was a time when it did very much feel like the wild, wild west, didn't it? In terms of, everything was about hallucinations and nothing really was robust as far as managing hallucinations. And I actually think that the platforms that struggle, all the platforms that I've kind of tested and used and stuff like that, the ones that struggle are the ones that try and do it all themselves, as in do it all themselves behind the scenes, but then release something very basic on the front end. And that front end is usually something like upload your PDFs, give us a web link, and we'll do the rest. I don't want to call it. Well, I can call out Google because Google's massive, but that's kind of what Google does. Put your data sources in here, and just call this search facility from within Dialogflow CX, and don't worry about it. We'll handle it. And every time I've tried anything like that, it just doesn't work. And I think you explained it last time we spoke really well, which is that might get you 80% of the way there, but it won't get you the whole way. So I don't know if you want to kind of share a little bit more thoughts on that side of things.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head in terms of the 80%. Like, there's so many organizations that we interact with, and it's becoming a more understood fact, but there's still this particular dynamic exists quite a bit where it's like we had a team, we've done a couple day hackathon project. this AI is amazing. Like we've loaded some information in a GPT, and we're able to answer questions beyond our wildest dreams. Like it's amazing how good the question answering is. And every now and then it hallucinates, but that'll just be something we could clean up later. Like we're almost there. We have that little hallucination management problem to deal with, and then we can release this. And the reality is that remaining 20%, if it took you a couple days to get to 80%, that remaining 20% is like 1,000 times harder.
Mm.
And so in some cases, like you hear of projects where it's like, we've been working on this for months. And like every change we make represents a regression in some other way. And so we just like can't get there in the technique that we're applying. And so I think, the popularity of RAG, and as I kind of highlighted, you at the end of the day, you can't entirely trust the AI. And so you need the mechanisms in place to be able to not trust the AI and have determinism applied to the answers that come out of AI.
Mm. And that, I suppose, then is predicated on the architecture that you have behind the scenes.
For sure. And RAG is definitely a piece of it. I think the basic concept of RAG is pretty simplistic. Everybody understands. And maybe for those that don't, just if you're a new listener to this space, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, it's essentially using the AI to understand the intent of an inquiry, but not using the AI to provide the answer to the inquiry. That the answer, or the information that's used to generate the answer, is retrieved from, there's the retrieval part, retrieved from a trusted source. And then again, the AI is used to generate an answer with that trusted information. That's where the risk of hallucinations come in the process, because sometimes if the information that you provided to the AI is not complete to answer the question, it's going to insert some of its own additional information and make some additional assumptions, and that can lead to an incorrect answer. And so that process of retrieval augmented generation, it's pretty simple. The platforms that implement it, like at Quiq, there's quite a bit of complexity in there to do that really well, because you want to be able to combine static information, PDFs, other document sources, along with real-time access to like bespoke information for the person that you're interacting with, like their account balance or their current order information. And you want to be able to combine that in an answer, but then you also, when that answer is generated, need to be able to have really advanced fact checking to make sure that the claims that were made in the information that was provided, those claims are substantiated in the answer that is generated. And so there's there's quite a bit in the logistics of actually making this work. And the other, just to go there a little bit further, the other thing I'll comment about this is, and this goes back to your like what's changed in RAG. What I just described for RAG, that's like basic RAG. That's kind of like knowledge lookup. What we've seen in the last year is RAG has gotten the usage of RAG, and this, again, this stuff that people are building into platforms, and we've built into our platform, is the ability to automate a multi-step business process. So whether it's booking an airline flight or changing a reservation, those activities are using your example, Kane, like canceling an account, those activities include the collection of data, the enforcement of business process. And that collection of data is usually multi-step. Like you ask a question, and then based on that answer, you need to go and get some additional information. But people aren't always linear. And so they might not answer the question directly. They might actually veer off course. And if you're interacting with a human agent and you're in the process of like changing an order, and then you say, well, how much does that item cost before I add it to my order? Like the human agent would answer that question and then continue on with the process of changing the order. In historical kind of dialogue flow driven NLP, you wouldn't be able to veer off course there. And so like that, expanding the RAG paradigm to be able to support like this multi-step business process and ability to veer off course and then come back on again is another area that I think has changed quite a bit this year.
That's interesting. I mean, you could do that with the more rule-based approach. It's just that's what designers spent all their time doing basically was, at this point in time, when we say this, we expect one variation of these responses. However, there's a sequence expansion here because they could ask this, this, and this, and therefore you have to. No platform made it easy, apart from a couple that I know of. No platform really made it easy for you to do that dialogue management. You had to basically build it every single time. So at every point in the conversation, you could say, at this point, we could go here or there or there, or they could ask a question, therefore we've got to go here and come back. So you had to build the state management for everything all the time. And what that meant is that, one, it got incredibly complex because conversations are complex and no conversation is the same. And therefore, the way that they all hangs together is a nightmare. And once you actually put it live, there's just so many dependencies that you change one thing in one place and it just completely breaks the whole thing somewhere else. So it's always been doable, but a very hard problem. Whereas because of the language understanding capabilities of generative AI, seemingly from what you're saying, that process now is easier.
It comes back to the ability to reason and understand, because you're totally right. Like, it was a huge spaghetti mess if you in the flow of, like, at every point in time I want to be able to answer this particular question. So every state in the flow, it's like, at this point in time we want to be able to answer these set of questions, and then let's branch to somewhere else, but then be able to come back and pick up the state. Yeah, it was possible, but like, it was an exponential complexity problem. Like, it just exploded based on the number of kind of like branch outs that you wanted to handle at a particular state.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you kind of manage the difference between? So I'm literally putting the finishing touches to an article this week, which is what I call the full stop problem with RAG. And it's interesting hearing you starting to talk about the process automation side of it, because it might be that, you can shed some light on this, which is the full stop problem basically is most RAG solutions end their responses with a full stop. And in conversations, there is turn taking. So when we're talking, when I'm inviting you to take the next turn. And I know when you're inviting me to take the next turn, your inflection changes, you might ask a question, you might pause for a while. So there's signs around turn taking. And what RAG applications, in my experience, typically don't do is they have no concept of turns. Therefore, they never invite the next turn. What they do is they get a question from a user and they answer the question based on the content that it has, and it always ends in a full stop. Even if, let's say, for example, you're a telco and the question that somebody asks you is, how do I upgrade my contract? All of the RAG systems I've seen will answer that question and they'll end it with a full stop. They won't recognize the subtext of that question, which is somebody with a need to do something. They think it's a question that needs answering rather than something that needs doing. And therefore, they fail to append that response with, is that something you're looking to do now? Can I help you do that? Let's log you in. Have you found a phone you like, or whatever. And then the third thing is that some journeys that are a little bit more exploratory in nature require a deeper understanding of the customer life cycle. So let's say, for example, if I'm having a general conversation with a chatbot about, I don't know, let's say mortgages. If I'm in the market for a mortgage and I'm close to purchasing a mortgage, the questions that I'm going to ask are going to be very different. Can I port my mortgage over from this house? What's the rates going to be, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas if I'm a first-time buyer and I'm just inquiring, I'm going to be asking, like, what is a mortgage? How do you calculate interest rates? Like, how often do I have to pay it back? On average, what's my payments going to be? So, like, depending on the life cycle I'm at, I've got different questions. So the AI's job over time is going to be to understand where I am, and then when's the right time for me to suggest, hey, do you want to book an appointment with a mortgage advisor? And so the reason why I call it the full stop problem is because all the RAG systems I've seen fail to understand when a question is not a question, it's a request for an action. Fail to understand that there's subtext in questions that actually correspond to an action, and fail to identify that someone is in a certain stage of the journey, and therefore what's the appropriate action we could suggest as part of that. So I don't know if you've had any thoughts around any of that kind of stuff and how to approach it.
A ton of thoughts about that topic. So I think I'm not blaming RAG for the full stop problem. I'm probably blaming the implementation on RAG. And so, again, thinking about from the most basic thing, like RAG is a pipeline. You start with a question, you end with an answer, and then you like restart the whole thing again. And that's like basic RAG. But the next level down is it's not necessarily a problem with the RAG paradigm, I don't think. It's more of a problem of the creativeness of the implementation. And so when we implement a RAG paradigm and do an agent, the beginning of the pipeline is not just like, well, we've got a new inquiry, let's process this new inquiry. It's actually like, what is my current state? Before even looking at the user's inquiry, like understanding the current state of where we might be in the process of applying for a mortgage loan, in which case, like, so we need to coach the AI a little bit differently and maybe even go down a different path. And so, I think in very simplistic RAG, like user says something, one turn, incoming text, let me go and understand the intent and then process that intent. Well, in most of our implementations, when we see that the customer says something, it's not like one LLM turn to like, oh, what's the intent of this thing or classify their statement. There might be 8 or 10 simultaneous LLM completions that get issued in parallel to understand different aspects. And so you're using your example, like first of all, let me try to look this person up and determine whether they have a current mortgage loan or if they're in the application process or if they're a prospect. And then I'm going to use that information later to generate a more appropriate response. And or if I'm in a conversational flow, and I'm partway through the mortgage application, and now I'm veering off. Like all that state needs to be maintained in the implementation. So I don't necessarily think it's a problem with simplistically RAG doesn't handle what I'm describing here, but a complex there's ways to manage state and control the flow, do more LLM completions to determine additional information that can handle that. So I don't necessarily say, fault RAG, but I probably the requirement to do a more complex implementation to handle the stuff that you're describing is like absolutely the case, and that's kind of what we do inside of our platform.
So that is it's like you've read the article. That's basically the recommendation in there is that there has to be one. There's two things. There has to be a state management of some description. So when you're saying that maybe the issue is not the RAG, it's the implementation of RAG, hearing what you're describing there, for me, the RAG bit is the retrieval and the summarization. And what you're describing...
It's like the inside, and there's a bunch of stuff out around the outside that makes
Exactly.
the more complex use case work.
Exactly, yeah. So it's predicated on having that. The state management is essentially managing the conversation, isn't it? It's managing the dialogue, it's managing where it's been and where it's going and what the next turn should be and all this kind of stuff. But that's different to just RAG, So it's like, from what I've seen, most of the deployments, they just do RAG. They don't really have an awareness of state management, which is, a problem.
Right. And also there's another nuance where, like, if the customer asks a question and they using your mortgage example, maybe they ask a question and then you go and say, okay, I'm going to run it's first question, we're going to run my standard RAG pipeline. There's no state involved at this moment in time. And then I go and do my information query, the retrieval, and I've got conflicting pieces of information coming back. And those two conflicting pieces of information, one is for a current mortgage customer and another is for a prospect. And so at that point in time, I could risk a hallucination and try to combine the answers, and again risk like an incorrect answer. Or like ideally, if it was a human agent involved, they would have, the human agent would have gone and queried their knowledge base. They got 2 articles back and they were like, oh, in order to answer this question, I need to know whether it's a prospect or an existing mortgage holder. And then they ask the question, and then like now we've got a little bit of state, and the customer answers, well, I'm just a prospect. and then the agent can actually answer the question. So there's like a multi-turn process to get to the right answer that involves some disambiguation. And so that's another example of like the types of stuff that need to be done to make these things really work well.
That's a really good example because then also you can maintain that in your short-term memory as part of the
Yep.
conversation so that next time you don't need to do the same thing again. You don't need to ask them again if they're a prospect or a current mortgage holder because you've got that. So next time you do a retrieval, there's also two conflicting pieces of information. You can then just use the pipeline to say, well, we already know that this is a current customer, so pick the right content from that. How do you approach, though, and has this become an important part for you yet or not, which is that one conversation that happens with that customer, you need to have the short-term memory to maintain the context of the conversation. But what about if that customer has that mortgage inquiry conversation and then abandons the chat? There's important information inside that chat now, which is that Kane has been on the website and he's interested in a mortgage. So how do we, next time Kane comes on the website, based on his cookies or whatever, or next time Kane contacts us on a contact center, how do we start to thread together a piece of that journey? Because that seems to be another missing link in most organizations when it comes to the chat side of things. I don't know if you've thought about that much.
100%. Like I couldn't agree more. Like ideally, and this doesn't happen in contact centers either. So this is kind of like my utopian view of the world. Like ideally, when I would call my mortgage company, what would appear on my human agent screen would be like the current record of the mortgage, and the person would say to me, "Hi, Mike. I see that you're past due. Can I help you with that?" And so like actually like preloading the conversation with the current state and proactively attempting to actually like start the conversation maybe where the customer wants to go. And so like that hasn't really been done in the human context. Maybe it could be done more effectively in the AI context. But like my view of a really great agent in the future is where the agent is preloaded with a bunch of information about the particular customer and can provide a bespoke experience based on what's going on with that person at that moment in time.
Mm.
Start the conversation with it. Don't just say, every conversation shouldn't start with, how can I help you today? It should be, I see your order is delayed. Can I help you with that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, same thing and across all channels really, even on the website. Like there's all kinds of opportunity to do things like contextual prompts. Hey Mike, I noticed you've been on the website for 5 minutes. You seem to be dwelling on this particular page about this particular topic. Like, is there something I can help you with or whatever? Like I think there's loads of room to, because ultimately that's what's going to get adoption driving. Like not everyone goes to the website and just opens the chat button on the bottom corner. And there's also a bigger conversation, I think, actually, in terms of the role of the interface. What I'd like to see in 2025 is more companies being a bit more bold about how they leverage the interface rather than having it as this little tiny widget in the bottom corner that as soon as you open it, all of your attention is focused on this little tiny thing in the bottom corner of the screen. The whole real estate of the website is still there, but all the attention's focused down here. So I think integrating the conversational UI with the rest of the UI is, I think, hopefully what we can see next year.
Yeah, and there's a future, maybe, I mean, this is me being an evangelist here. There's a future where today it's the website and the chat button is the little thing on the bottom. Maybe there's a future where there's a conversational interface and the website's a little thing on the bottom.
Yeah, yeah. Or the website is the in service of the conversation rather than the other way around.
Exactly.
I have
Yep.
the same thought in terms of the way contact centers operate today, and contact center vendors in particular. They all have this approach where the main focus is, we're going to sell you a contact center. What you need to do is migrate your contact center from here to here, right? So tell us how many numbers you've got and what the routes are and all the integrations and how many agents you've got and all that kind of stuff. And what we'll do is we're just going to move it from here and we're going to put it over here. And by the way, we've also got an AI component. So do you want to buy that add-on? Whereas really the story should be, look, we're going to transform your customer experience. Let's analyze your customer needs. Let's analyze all your conversations. Let's figure out what's going to be automated, what's going to be semi-automated, then what's going to go to your people. And by the way, while we're here, we can also sell you the contact center as an add-on. The main thing is going to be the automation and the AI strategy. The next bit that we can add on is going to be the contact center.
I bet you and your team could help people with that type of transformation.
Well, as luck would have it, Mike, yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that we do. But yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's my rant. And any, I know we're up on time now. Any other thoughts for 2025? What should business leaders and CX practitioners that are focused on AI, what should they be thinking about and focusing on in 2025?
This might be kind of contrite at this point in time, but I'll say, like, don't sit back further. Like, you need to actually get started with AI. I mean, I think pretty much the world is moving down the AI path, so maybe that is unnecessary at this point in time. But like, don't wait any longer. And I think the other one is a lot of organizations are struggling with this concept of buy versus build, and they're wringing their hands. And like, can we do it internally? Do we need to do it internally? Is it strategic that it has to be done internally because it is so strategic? And that conundrum of build versus buy in our world doesn't need to exist. And I think that there's a middle path there that you can start with a powerful platform that avoids a lot of the effort associated with a build from scratch. But then also gets you to the point where you can build very quickly and doesn't require a bunch of resources. So the build versus buy decision, we've been using the phrase, actually, you should buy to build, and work with a vendor like Quiq.
That's a good point. Buy in the infrastructure and then build it yourself on top of that.
Correct. Because, I mean, a lot of organizations don't want to be completely dependent upon a vendor. Like, we need to make a change, like, we'll go call the vendor. They want to be agile and make things on the fly. But then today, I think a lot of organizations are like, well, in order to maintain that level of control, we need to start with Pinecone and Llama Index or LangChain, and we need to build from the very bottom. And at this point, you don't need to build from the very bottom. I mean, it's kind of like starting with hammers and chisels. You should start with power tools.
Good point. And the risk there is that you over optimize for that one solution. And so all the stuff that we're talking about here in terms of you need state management, then you need to be able to do processes and all this kind of stuff. It's like becomes a nightmare if you've just super over optimized for this simple RAG solution. It's like, yeah, you may as well just find someone who's already solved that problem and use that.
And I'm a software engineer by trade. And so I think folks that have worked in software will appreciate this. The first implementation of anything is never that good. It's like the second or third iterations is when like you've actually dialed it in and have built a good implementation. And so if you're planning on building internally, your first implementation is probably going to be a throwaway at some point in time. And that seems like a pretty expensive project.
Yeah. David Lowe, who used to be the CEO of The List, used to work at BBC and Sky, kind of running their AI stuff. I think he was also at Amazon working on Alexa. In 2017, when everyone was building Alexa skills, and the first, I suppose, for me, that was like the first generation of AI kind of bots and stuff like that. And he used to always say that businesses that do this for the first time will always build their first bot twice. And I think we're kind of in that space again by the sounds of things.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think the other unfortunate thing, and something I'm looking forward to 2025 is for a variety of limitations, internal systems, like initial scope of implementation, nobody has built a really, I mean, there's slivers of like, that is a really good agent, but nobody has built a fantastic agent yet. And so I'm looking forward to 2025 being like, whoa, that's way better than anything else that we've seen. And so, you know, we're working with some of our clients to kind of like go to that next level. But everybody realizes the potential. There's not a bunch of examples in the industry right now where you're like, that is an amazing agent.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Hopefully, we don't have the same thing we had with chatbots, which was kind of the same thing. Like 3 companies doing it great, bunch of other companies trying, but the real success flagship cases were a bit hard to come by. So I agree. Hopefully, 2025 is a good year of success. And I think differently this time, there's generally, I think, the noise and the awareness and all that stuff surrounding AI is such that I think a lot more businesses are actually mobilizing with it. So hopefully I agree with you. Hopefully we'll see a lot more really good deployments and some great use cases next year.
Absolutely.
Wicked. Nice one. Mike, thank you so much. Don't forget, You can sign up to the webinar that we're doing with Bill O'Neill from Quiq next week. You can get there, vux.world/webinars, or just go to vux.world. There's a big banner at the top. Click on that. You can register there. And if you want to try Quiq, Mike, how can people try Quiq? Quiq.com?
Quiq.com, Quiq.com. And you can also do /AI-studio, but you can also find that link on the site. Kane, you've done a great job of bringing together conversational designers and AI builders in a community. And if there are members of that community that want to experiment and learn more about RAG and how to make safe RAG, manage hallucinations, on that Quiq.com/AI studio, you can also sign up for an AI Studio trial site and go through what we call the AI Studio Academy and learn about how to use the tool and actually build and experiment with your own generative AI experience. So everybody, feel free to go and check that out.
Brilliant. And I don't say this about very many vendors at all, but I can definitely say that for me, Quiq is onto something. You know, the way that you have the platform set up, the kind of approach that you have to retrieval augmented generation and context management and all that kind of stuff, I think is unique in the industry. And so I would also encourage people to go and check it out, because it is genuinely, the first time I saw it in terms of what's going on behind the scenes, it was an eye-opening, experience for me. I was like, right, so that's how it doesn't hallucinate. That's why it can manage the conversation pretty well. And so, yeah, I would definitely encourage people to do the same. Quiq.com, and I'll put the links in the show notes as well, so you can go and check it out.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And I'll also add, so I'll return the favor here, Kane, that if folks are trying to figure out how to get started with Quiq and AI Studio, your team can also provide some expertise about how to build agentic AI and inside of a tool like Quiq.
Indeed. And that completes the circle. So indeed, if you are interested in that, then ping me as well and we can chat about that without a doubt. Wicked. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think I could do this all night, every night, basically. But until next time, thank you so much.
Oh, it's awesome. I always enjoy the conversation. Thank you, King.
And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. In fact, this is the last one before Christmas. So I think it's the last one before Christmas. Do we have one next week? I think this is the last one. If it is, I think it is. Have a very Merry Christmas. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, and we'll see you in the new year. Merry Christmas, Mike. See you soon.